Okay, let's get started. Let's get started, guys. It's the time. It's the time of the week. Let's get started. Let's get started. So before anything else, let me remind you, it is seminar week. It is seminar week. You guys, you should go to your seminar group if you have not already been there. Bring your assignment with you. Important, bring your assignment with you to the seminar group. Okay. So today we start this off a little differently. All right, so normally I come along, have one of those funny little quizzes for you, and we look at some things that move around and stuff. Today we do this a little differently. Today you guys are actually going to take part of a real little mini survey. Right? So today I ask you to go to another website. I'll scan the QR code if you're one of those fancy people who knows how this works. Go to this website and fill in that questionnaire. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that. There you will see 4 questions there. That's sort of a tiny mini survey. And when you do surveys, often we actually use exactly the same software that you're going to see now. Right? And the survey that you're taking there, some of you guys are already on this website. It's actually related to another course that I'm teaching. You know, I also have a second year course. I teach a course on analytical sociology. So maybe next year, if you like this kind of stuff, if you like my style, and if you're still around, analytical sociology. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays. And there I talk about a lot of fascinating stuff. I think we do a lot of fascinating stuff, but there some things are even more fascinating. And tomorrow the topic is going to be on what we call the wisdom of the crowds. The wisdom of the crowd. Maybe some of you have heard about that. It's this idea that, you are already very clever, you are already very intelligent, but in a crowd, in a group, people can sometimes be even more intelligent. So that's this idea of swarm intelligence. Maybe you heard about that one before. And you are partaking now of something where I'm going to check if that is actually true, if there is some swarm intelligence here, and I will talk about that tomorrow. So you guys are helping me out here by filling out this survey. And the results, I will keep you updated about them as well. So give it another 2-3 minutes for you to fill out, and then we're going to start. The funny thing is when they did this the first time, the crowd was incredibly precise. So some people were really off, but the crowd as a whole was incredibly precise. So I'm really excited to see what I don't know if you guys replicate that. And actually one of the things is that when people start talking about these kind of questions, then the result goes off, right? So if you start talking with each other, the crowd is not that intelligent anymore. Anyway, thanks very much, guys, for filling this out. I'll keep you updated about the results. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get started with the lecture for today. Today we're going to talk about the research process and research design. Research process and research design. And these are sort of the kind of things, that I had a class like this, I had an undergraduate class like this, and there was a guy telling me stuff about how I should do research, right? And then you listen to that, and sometimes it just sounds incredibly patronizing. Those guys tell you, do this, then do that, and then go along with that, and they tell you, follow the rules, do this and that, and when I hear these kind of things, I'm just rebelling, right? I say, fuck the rules, Instead of, this is sometimes, are you thinking that I'm stupid, right? So I don't think that you guys are stupid, but we already had this a whole bunch of times here, that there was something that we thought was very trivial. We thought it was very trivial, but then at the end, it didn't turn out to be that trivial at all, right? So now in this course, well, of course you can still say fuck the rules, right? And you can still say, and some really good people, they seem to defy gravity, right? They fly above things, they reinvent the rules. And these are some really good people. I've seen a handful of people like that. But let's face it, most of the time, trying to defy gravity really rips you apart. So that doesn't really work that well, right? So, and then you come up, you try to reinvent stuff, you reinvent the rules, you reinvent the way we do research, and then that's what you come up with, right? And then you kind of realize, okay, well, maybe I should have followed those rules in the first instance. Or maybe I could have benefited from that in one way or the other, right? So this lecture clearly falls into this category, right? You can rebel, right? But you can also listen and hear and think about how useful this is. So it is about the research process, which is basically how research works. So all the stuff that we do, the steps that we go through when I do research myself, or when I supervise masters or PhD students here, which is what I do, and this is sort of how the whole thing goes. Right? It's sort of it's a process. It's a systematic way of approaching these different things. Okay, so let's get started with that. Well, the first thing here is be organized, be systematic. Well, I'm mentioning this here because I met a lot of very intelligent people, but they are just not organized. They just don't get their shit together. Right? And that kind of really pains me because I see a lot of talent being wasted. And I don't want you guys to waste your talents. Right? I want you guys to live up to your full potential. Yeah? And one part of that is being organized, being systematic, and go ahead with that. Right? So that definitely helps. And that's very important in this research process, where oftentimes you stand by yourself, I don't know, if you're lucky, you have a supervisor like me who kicks your ass, or you have a supervisor who doesn't care, right? And that's actually equally likely. That happens actually oftentimes. And then you really have to be organized. You have to be systematic about this. Focus. Focus, you can get washed away. I've seen it. As I told you, I was in some PhD mid exams here, where people are great, they are intelligent, they do interesting stuff, but they're not focused. So when they're not focused, it doesn't lead anywhere either, right? So be organized, be systematic, stay focused. Okay, so what are the steps when we do research? Well, broadly speaking, you can distinguish that, these 4 different steps, right? I think it helps to think about these different steps, because practically that's exactly how it goes. Often it starts with an explorative phase, and there are some things in there that we already talked about. There's a planning phase where you think through what are you going to do. Then there's the actual execution, right? Where you go out, you collect some data, or you do some analysis, and ultimately there's sort of the reporting stuff. And where you write up something, right? An assignment, or I don't know, I have to write papers, I have to write books. That's sort of how it works in my world. So these are sort of the different steps, and each one of them is important. Yeah. So the exploration phase at the beginning. Well, guys, we spent actually a whole lecture, and I devoted a whole lecture because I think that's really important to get you started on the right foot. Right? If you start with the wrong or with the stupid question, then it's actually or with an uninteresting question or something that you're not interested in, it's very unlikely to lead to anything. Right? So in the explorative phase, you have questions that you deal with. You try to come up with a research question, then you delve into the literature, and actually that's something that we'll do more next week. So next week we'll spend more time on literature and what it means. basically it's going out and trying to find out what did other people do already at this topic, right? So I don't know, there's a guy coming along and says, I want to study this, and I say, okay, what did other people find, right? Chances are you're not the first person looking at that. And so you want to know what is the current state of knowledge. Where are we? What are the research frontiers? What are the problems that people had so far, right? And that also helps you then to find, remember what I said about finding research gaps, right? That's sort of where all the literature comes into play, where you actually, you have to do your homework. You have to go home and you have to read stuff, right? And next week I'm going to tell you more about how we do that, right? Or what to look for in that context. At the same phase, there's sort of, these things happen all at the same time, sort of, thinking about your question and doing some literature review, and summarizing what others have said. But there you then also come along the theories that people used in this particular context, right? And the theories that can be useful to address your problem, right? And there, it's sort of writing the empirical literature reviews. Actually, that's stuff that I enjoy a lot as well, because it gives me an idea about, okay, what is out there, where are the research frontiers, and so on. When you go and when you find your theories, that's sometimes a little more tedious, because there it's often less clearly defined what is actually relevant for you, right? Because there are sometimes, and you could easily get washed away, and I've seen this happening. People get washed away, they go into the rabbit hole, and they don't come out of it anymore. So when you think about doing the literature review and in your explorative phase, think about the theories, always have in mind your target problem, how you're going to apply that, how is the theory going to help you to answer your research question. So don't get lost. So that's sort of this explorative phase. Yeah? That's sort of this explorative phase, how all good research starts. And actually, personally, I have this fourth element that I call fooling around. And I'm not joking, this is actually a serious step here. People write about this, how we actually fool around at the beginning. So this is sort of an early rapid prototyping phase. And for me, where I have an idea, right? I've done my homework, I've done some literature review, or I kind of looked at some theories and so on. And then I actually very quickly I jump into the data, or I collect something like asking you about the weight of this stupid cow. Right? I very quickly jump into this to see if my idea makes sense, if it's feasible. Can I actually do this kind of work? Because then another thing that unfortunately sometimes happens, there's a PhD student doing all these things, investing 2-3 years of his life, and then at the end it just doesn't work out. For whatever reason, the study is not going to work, or it requires too much computing power, all those kind of things, right? That you don't know unless you actually do it. So that's sort of this fooling around stage. And another thing that I often do, I met some very intelligent people in my life at different universities, and there I always wonder, what do those guys do? What do those guys do? What is the difference here? Is it something about this place? Is it something about those people? And the thing that I observe, and that's the stuff that I want to tell you, is that people don't do anything differently. They don't do anything magical. We have this saying, people, they just cook with the same water as everybody does. They do the same thing. They start with the same stupid ideas sometimes, but they're just persistent. But the one difference that I observed is that the really good people, the people that I admire, they are just really good in noticing when they do something stupid at an earlier stage. So they start doing something, they fool around, and then instead of wasting a year, wasting 6 months of their life, after a week they realize, okay, this is not going to work out. I fooled around, this is not going to go anywhere. So that's sort of the thing. You don't necessarily, I think, in order to improve your efficiency and to be very effective in what you do, I think you don't necessarily have to come up with better ideas to begin with. You just need to be better in realizing when to stop, right? And that's sort of where this fooling around part is actually very useful. So that's sort of actually why I'm telling you this. Okay, so that's sort of this explorative phase. So that's sort of, okay, we explored, we fooled around, we now have an idea, we have a question, we know something that we want to do, and now the next step is sort of this planning phase. And this planning phase, come back to that later on in the Badachachi text that you read. Actually, this is sort of the research design phase. But a research design, there's often sometimes also another meaning attached to it. So it's this planning phase, and in this planning phase, now again, there are a whole bunch of things happening at the same time. But you make your plan for the work, right? So you know you've done your homework, you have your question, you know what is the state of the art here right now. You have your theories that you want to apply or that you think are useful in that context. Now let's move on and think about how you're going to do this research. One element that we have here is what we call this design thing, and that's sort of something that I come back later on. There, remember last time I talked about this longitudinal idea, right? That we go out and we collect stuff at different points in time, or we can have experiments or whatnot where we intervene with something, right? Or we have some other things. And that's sort of what we come back to that, what exactly design means in a few minutes. Then the other thing is, okay, then you have your idea about how you're going to study that. Then you think about how to derive measures here. So that what are the things that you're actually going to collect at the end of the day? And that's what we call operationalization. Remember, we have our theories, propositions, constructs, concepts, and these kind of things, yeah? And we boil them down to stuff that we can actually measure then at the end of the day. And that's sort of this operationalization. Yeah? It's kind of finding things that we can actually then use to represent our constructs. And then there's also this method coming into play, right? And we will talk much more about these kind of things, about the stuff that you can actually do. You can, do a survey, like a mini survey like I just did, yeah? Or you can do interviews, you can do participant observations. Basically, as I said, the limits are your boundaries of your thinking here. So this is sort of the method of how to actually then do something, also how to analyze it. If you go down the statistical route, which sort of statistical analysis are you going to do? Which method are you going to run? Some fancy cross-random effects, crossover regression, stuff that I do in my free time. Seriously, and or are you going to run some other analysis, things like that? So that's sort of in the method part, and then the sampling part. Sampling part often means often, not always, but often. Often, what you do, you go out and you collect information from a sample of people, right? We cannot go out. We cannot talk with everybody in the world. We cannot, interview everybody in the world. So what you're going to do, you're going to sample from the population that you want to study, right? And then there are all these different things where you then have to consider how do you sample, how do you derive, or kind of then this idea of randomization is then an idea here, right? Think about, okay, let's just pick people at random, and then this should tell us something about the whole population. And then depending on how you pick things at random, we can tell about how wrong you would be about the stuff that you would conclude for the whole population, and these kind of things. So that's sort of what we call sampling. And we have a session on sampling as well. So all these things will come back eventually. Okay, so that's sort of the planning stage where we really lay down the groundwork. So that this is our plan. Now we are ready to go, and this is the stuff as a supervisor I want to see my student to come up with. And I say, yeah, perfect, let's go. Let's get this data. Let's nail this. Let's hammer this up. Okay, so that's sort of this planning phase, and then the third phase is this execution. Yeah. And you see already, okay, now there were 2 steps before, and there's a whole bunch of stuff involved before we actually go out and do the real thing, right? So it's not just going out and saying, okay, now I'm going to ask people. Yeah, you can do that, but then you're not really systematic about it, right? I'm not a huge fan of overstretching these things either, like kind of dilly-dallying around for years and then eventually going and collect your data. You saw me, I kind of like to jump in, but I like to do that in my fooling around stage before I'm then more systematic about it. So in the execution stage, you then actually go and you get your data, right? Or you collect your data and you analyze your data. And we also come back to that at a later stage, and hopefully we will all together pilot something together. So I have this idea that we're all going to do a questionnaire, and then we all pilot it and collect some data. And with a pilot study, we mean that we actually test if our way of data collecting or our research strategy actually works, right? Because you could come up with a great questionnaire, but you never tested it on somebody. And then you send it out, and then you realize people don't understand your question. And that can happen very easily, right? And then if you wouldn't have this pilot in before, where you just basically it's a test run, right? You have some people, you give them the questionnaire, you let them discuss the question, and that's something that we're going to do together. If you don't do that, then you might imagine a huge government spending initiative on a study where they collect a lot of data, but nobody understands the fucking question. So then, that's sort of why you want to have the pilot study in before. It's basically a test run, right? Again, a safe environment, you get feedback, and then based on that, you adapt your study design maybe, or your questions, or whatever you want to do. It's a learning phase, basically. And then you go out, and then you have the real data collection phase, right? There you go into the field, you look at the world, or whatever you do, but you collect your data. And after that, you have your data, then you go and then you analyze it. And that's also stuff that we're going to do towards the end of this course, where you have a data set, and then you need to do something with it, right? So how are you going to draw conclusions from that? And this is actually a very useful skill to possess when you know how to deal with this kind of stuff, how to deal with this data, right? Just the other day, I was in a meeting with folks from the Department of Social Protection and folks from the Central Statistical Office, and they just emphasized how much they need people who can do these kind of things. So if you're thinking about where to go, where the jobs are, it's clearly in this area. Okay, so that's sort of the execution phase. And then, equally important at the end is this reporting phase, right? Because I could have done the best research in the world if I don't write a report about it, or if I don't put it in written form or in whatever form that people can understand. Who cares about it? Yeah? So, or who knows about it in the first instance? So it's sort of this reporting thingy, it's writing up, and probably we'll talk next week about this a little bit as well. About writing up, when you look at how you write stuff in an academic way, it's actually very clear. There are always these clear pieces of the puzzle in here. It's always the abstract. When you read journal articles, and that's sort of how nowadays it actually works. Nobody writes books anymore. You write journal articles. There's an abstract which summarizes the whole thing, what you do. Then you have an introduction where you situate your problem. You outline what you're going to do. You have your literature review where you put it in the context of what the other people did, right? Where you summarize the state of the current knowledge, or you relate it to debates that are out there. Then you have your method section where you describe what you actually do, right? This is how I collected my data. This is sort of the kind of analysis that I did. Then you present your findings. You have your results section. Then you discuss your results section. Like you link it back to the literature review before, or to the debates that you kind of brought up. What does it mean? What do my findings mean? How do they add up? How do they fit into the bigger picture? And at the end, you have the conclusion. So that's sort of the way how you write a paper. When you write a bachelor thesis, when you write a master thesis, this is how you write a paper. This is sort of how you lay it out with a clear structure: abstract, introduction, literature review, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. So these are sort of the elements that bring this together, and this is sort of how, in the academic world, how we write stuff and how we are systematic about things. Lastly, and this is becoming more and more important, and some colleagues are more into this than others. It's actually this dissemination, and by that we mean telling people about your stuff. And I think that is important, right? Because if nobody knows about your stuff, and there's so much academic stuff out there, then how should people ever care? So I think this is becoming more and more important in the academic world, and for you guys, when you are elsewhere, you end up in a company. Not all of you guys will end up being university professors, although I hope that some of you will. You need to communicate this stuff, right? You need to write a memo. You need to let other people know about what you found in your company or whatnot. So that's our dissemination part. And nowadays, people have Twitter accounts, people tweet about things. I had a colleague who spent more time writing a press release than the actual paper. That was actually funny. But anyway, it is an important element of the business these days. Okay, so these are sort of the steps. Yeah. So thanks for bearing with me. No, I'm not saying that this is all trivial or that you guys are stupid, but I want to lay it out so that you guys know this is sort of how we go through this. Okay, now let's talk about this research design stuff. Research design. After all, this course is called Sociological Analysis and Research Design. Huh? By the way, I didn't choose the title, but here I am. Research design. Research design is sometimes actually a little confusing. What the hell is a research design? And even in the two stuff that I gave you to read, they use this term differently. Right? Research design sometimes means different things for different people. For example, in the Badashashi book, yeah, page 21, that was one of the readings for today. For him, research design is this whole planning phase, right? Where you plan your work and you think about how to operationalize it, what kind of methods you're going to have, what kind of sampling you're going to have, right? That's sort of what Badashashi says. Bryman has a different view on this. For him, a research design is more the way you approach your problem, right? And there's sort of this, remember kind of the stuff that we talked about last time. You can go out, you can collect your data at one point in time, or you can go out and collect your data at different points of time, right? Then it's a longitudinal design, and these allow you different things to do. And I think in this case, I'm standing with Bryman. So I think design does not equal the method, right? There is a difference, and hopefully this will become clear to you at the end of this lecture. I'm never a huge fan of making these hair split things of definitions. Sometimes when we cannot keep things apart, or if the community hasn't really managed to keep things apart, maybe the distinction is not that useful. So that's what I'm thinking. And then maybe we shouldn't be too obsessed with these things either. But what Bryman does here, and that's sort of why I'm following him here, is he outlines these different approaches that actually really differ. They really differ in the logic, the way they help you to find out stuff. And the reason why this stuff is not equivalent to a method is because you can use all sorts of methods for these different designs. So oftentimes people think case study is only associated with qualitative interviews, or longitudinal studies are only associated with surveys. That's not true. That's just not true. You can have a longitudinal element in your case studies, or you can have a comparative analysis based on surveys, or things like that. Right? So that's sort of where this distinction comes into play, or sometimes it's not entirely clear, but talking about these 5 different elements I think is useful. So that's why I'm going to talk about each one of them now. Okay, so these different research designs, there's basically different ways of finding out stuff about your subjects. Right? Finding out stuff about your subjects, and sometimes there are things you don't know about your subjects. And sometimes there are things you can never know about your subjects. Okay? But your research design can actually help. It's actually really cool stuff, that even though we don't know something, we can still control for it. We can still take care of it in our analysis. That's sort of crazy stuff, where we model unobserved heterogeneity in our error curve. So that's sort of a technical term. You don't need to know that. But if you're interested in that, that's sort of very interesting stuff. So what I'm going to try to do now is to come back to this example that we had the last time. Right? Like the statement that children that watch a lot of TV are the most violent. Now what I'm going to try, let's see how this is going to work out. Now I'm going to explain these different research designs to you, and I'm going to apply them to this particular context. Right? So how would a research design look like to study this kind of stuff? Right? Okay. So let's start with the experimental design. Okay, experimental design, it doesn't mean I have to blow up stuff. Yeah? Experimental design, it's actually really neat and very clever. At the end, it is about a blue pill and a red pill. That's what experimental design is about. You're given a choice. Some people get the blue pill, some people get the red pill. and then you see what happens, right? So basically you have an intervention. You have an intervention, and then the idea is that the difference between these two groups, although there might be all these other things that might matter, but you don't know, but you don't care, as long as you assign your people at random to either the control or to the treatment group, the difference should be because of the treatment that you gave them. That's sort of this idea, which is in the experimental stuff. You know, in the sciences they do these things much more, but in the social sciences we also do them. And I think that some of the most convincing work uses the stuff that convinces me is really using experiments, using experimental designs. So the idea is you assign people to a treatment and to a control group. Now there are more complicated ways of doing this, and we come back to that. We have a whole session on this. Then you test both of the groups before you do anything with them, right? You look at, I don't know, how intelligent are they? How intelligent are the people in the blue group, and how intelligent are the people in the red group, right? And then you give them a treatment. You change something which only affects the treatment group but does not affect the control group, and then you test them again. And then the idea is that the group differences after the treatment compared to before the treatment, they should be due to the intervention. Right? That's sort of the basic idea, the basic principle of an experimental design. And you know, I mentioned this thing of unobserved heterogeneity. It means that there's stuff about people that we don't know. I don't know. I can design the best questionnaire. I'm still missing out on some stuff, right? Because I don't know. I just don't have the time, or I don't know that this is important for the people, for whatever I want to study. Here, it's being dealt with through assigning people at random to either the one or to the other group. Right? Then the idea is that all those things that we don't observe, we say they should matter for both groups equally, right? So all those things that we don't observe, they should not matter for the differences between the groups that we observe. That's sort of the basic idea. That's the idea that sort of unobserved heterogeneity matters for everybody equally. Right? Okay, so that's sort of the gold standard. Right? So the really, really good stuff, because it's very convincing. You know? We can establish causality in a very straightforward way. Remember all the stuff that we talked about last time. Which one is the chicken? Which one is the egg? Yeah? So there are these kind of things. Which one comes first? With an experimental design, you control that stuff. You change something, and then you look at, okay, what is the effect of that? It's a very clear way of getting towards causality. Yeah. So now let's think about this in this context of the kiddies watching TV and being violent. Right? And you will also see some problems with that kind of design in this particular case already. So the idea would be, okay, we assign some children randomly to the control group and some children randomly to the treatment group. Then we test how violent the kids are in both of these groups, and then we have our intervention. And that intervention can mean different things. So here now, I don't know, in an extreme way, we force children in the control group to watch children in the treatment group. We force children in the treatment group. There's a mistake here. I'm sorry. It's in the treatment group. Force children in the treatment group to watch a lot of TV, while children in the control group watch TV normally. Right? And then after that, we test again how violent are they. So this is our intervention. We intervened. We enforced a change here, and then we look at, okay, what are the implications of this? And then we calculate the group differences. I already see, okay, sometimes this might work out fine. There are some fascinating results, and there can be many different treatments. One treatment could be how a question is being formulated, for example. And hopefully I'm going to run this with you as well later on during the semester. So you slightly formulate a question differently for one group, but you keep it for the other one. And then actually you see how different are they, right, in their responses. Then you know it's due to the question wording or the way you formulated this particular question. It's also a very neat way of testing your questions. But there you can do that, right? Or you can do, expose people to different things that they watch. They watch a video or movie, and then you ask them about it afterwards, or you have them do something else afterwards in a way. But forcing kids to watch a lot of TV, that's sort of a radical measure to some degree. Right? Some parents might have something against that. So there are clear ethical issues here, and you cannot always do these things. But there are some really interesting social experiments. So for example, one of the things that just came to an end, and it's really fascinating, it's called the Moving to Opportunity for Fair Housing study. What that was, basically in the mid-1990s, basically, there's this big question always. How much is nature, how much is nurture? Right? This kind of idea. How much am I the product of my environment, and how much am I just the product of my genes? Right? And there's this whole idea, okay, well, both of these things matter. Yeah? The radical sociologists would say, oh, it's all about society, but that's bullshit. That doesn't work like that either. Sort of, while on the other side, the evolutionists would say it's all about the genes, but that doesn't work either. There's sort of something in between. We clearly have a nature-nurture interaction here, and things matter at the same time. So what people wanted to know is how much does living in a poor neighborhood affect people's life chances at the end of the day, right? Like growing up in a poor neighborhood, that's something we find. And that when you grow up in a poor neighborhood, you're less likely to have a great job at the end of the day when you're an adult, right? So you're also likely to end up being poor. How much is it really the environment here, right? That's sort of a tricky question to approach that. But what they did in this study, in this Moving to Opportunity for Fair Housing study, they did this on a large scale. They basically, in the 1990s, they gave 5,000 low-income families in the States basically free housing in a rich neighborhood. How cool is that? They gave them free housing in a rich neighborhood, poor people. They just planted them over there. They had another 5,000 people, they were in their control group. They also had a third control group, there's sometimes different control groups. But then basically they looked at them as well, but they didn't give them free housing. So just by chance, some people got free housing. And then they ran this for a long time, over 10, 15 years. And then they looked at where do the kids actually end up with, right? So they looked at the 13-year-olds that were sort of moved from a poor neighborhood to a rich neighborhood. And they looked at the 13-year-olds that were not moved, where the family did not move from the poor neighborhood to a rich neighborhood, but stayed in the poor neighborhood. And then they compared them with each other, and then they found that it actually had a big effect. It had a big effect. So there we can tell it's nothing about the individuals, it's about the environment. And there's sort of this experiment where they sort of had this intervention. So, just last year, guys presented their results, their work on the long-term results of this MTO. And this was the first study to find strong evidence that the program caused economic gains with children who moved from high poverty areas to low poverty areas when they were less than 13 years old, enjoying mean incomes nearly a third higher than children who did not move. So you see there's actually a big effect. Right? So folks got 30% more income when they were adults themselves as a consequence of this move. And we know it was the consequence of this move because we assigned people at random in the first instance, and we then looked at the differences between the treatment and between the control group. So that's sort of really, really fascinating stuff. Of course, there's also problems with that. I don't know, if I play too many experiments with you guys are not going to take me serious anymore. Actually, that's a serious problem for people who run experiments. They deplete the pool of respondents. They know how these things go, especially when they kind of keep playing the same kind of games again and again. So that's sort of experimental stuff, which is really, really fascinating. It's also very easy to read. That's sort of a nice thing, because it's very straightforward, right? There's sort of a treatment and a control. There we are. And the difference between these two things must be the intervention. Okay, the next one, in terms of design, like how we go and approach our problems, how we try to study stuff, are cross-sectional studies, or it's a cross-sectional design. Cross-sectional study, you can think of that as providing a snapshot at one moment in time of a frequency of some characteristics, for example, unemployment in a population at a given point in time. These cross-sectional studies, often these are sort of the workhorses of what we do, right? So we go out, we collect data at one point in time, but for many different subjects. And then here, remember how we try to, right, it all leads to the stuff that we talked about last time already, kind of we want to see how do things differ from each other. That's only when we actually can say something. If I just say 50% of the people who commit suicide are unemployed, I don't know anything about it. Right? So in the experiment we have the intervention, which provides us this leverage to have this difference between the control and the treatment group. When we do cross-sectional studies, we look at variation within our sample. Yeah? So within the data for different subjects, we look at how unemployment are the people, or I don't know, how much was the unemployment rate of the people who committed suicide, and how much was the unemployment rate amongst people who did not commit suicide. So that's sort of looking at the variations of our independent variables in our sample. And it is the workhorse. It is the workhorse. So most of our studies actually have a cross-sectional design. Problem of unobserved heterogeneity. Things we don't observe. Actually, it is a serious problem. Remember the stuff of the third factors that I outlined last time with the Simpsons. If we don't know that, we are in a bit of trouble. So there's a lot of effort in kind of trying to deal with these kind of things, but there's no way that your design takes care of it, like in the experimental stuff. There, the design takes care of it. Same as for the longitudinal stuff that we'll come back in a second. There, the design solves a lot of your problems, but for the cross-sectional stuff, it does not. So there, we need to make sure that we collect enough information about our subjects, but we never know for certain. Large samples can help, try to capture as much as possible, and then look at the variations between your observations at one point in time. Okay, let's apply this to the TV study here. So what would I do? Well, I would go out and I conduct a survey, or interviews, and ask parents about their children. I would look at the level of violence and the amount of TV that children watch, and I would compare children who watch lots of TV with children who watch less TV, all at one moment in time. But you already see here the causality, I cannot really resolve that here. And that's sort of the tricky thing. That's sort of where then, we need to, I don't know, like in the case that I outlined with Elster, we might have to have support from above or support from below, all these other things to actually get closer to causality. But it is a major issue. So it is sort of the pragmatist way of doing research, simply because, I don't know, experiments are not always feasible, or they don't always work, or collecting stuff over a longer period of time doesn't work either, right? So oftentimes, that's just what we do. Okay, so it's not the gold standard, but sometimes it's still useful. Yeah? So still useful. Okay, now let's talk about the third one. That's sort of this longitudinal designs. Longitudinal design, remember I already prefaced it last time, longitudinal designs is basically this idea that time is your ally. Time is your ally. You go out and you collect stuff for the same people again and again, over different points of time, right? So you have a survey, and today, in the ideal world, next year, I'm going to ask exactly the same question to exactly the same people again, right? What is the idea here? Right? You collect data for subjects at time t1, at any point in time, and then have time pass by. Something happens in time, and then you collect data for the subject again at the later points in time. And by doing so, you can actually make profound statements about change. Oftentimes, I see people talking in their research proposal about change, but they don't study change. In order for change to be obvious, I need to see how was it before, how was it after. That's sort of how you look at change. And if you just look at one point in time, you cannot say anything about change. But oftentimes we want to say something about change, right? So you need to have time passing by. And then the idea here is that we compare individuals with themselves. And that's a very, very clever way. It's a very clever way. If you are interested in that, it's called panel analysis. That's really fascinating stuff, because there we know all those things that we don't observe. All those things that you don't observe about a particular individual, they should matter the same for the individual at time t1 and at time t2. So again, all the things that we don't observe should not matter for the difference that we observe between these 2 points in time when something else changed. Right? So this is the idea that this unobserved heterogeneity matters equally for the different points of time. And we can actually go and we can go and establish causality. What are some problems with this kind of studies? Well, it's a pain. It's a pain to collect data from the same people again and again. Sometimes people die, or they don't want to participate in the study anymore, and so on. So apply to the TV example, collect the data about the children at different points in time, calculate for each individual the difference between the level of violence at time T2 and time T1, and calculate for each individual the difference between the hours of TV watching at time T2 and T1. And then I compare the two differences. And then I look at the difference of the difference. It's a difference of difference approach, which is very clever. You need to wrap your head around it a little bit, but it's very clever. It solves a lot of your problems. And also the causality thing. Remember, that's sort of the stuff that I had outlined last time. With time, we can actually look at what causes what, right? Because we say the cause needs to be before the effect. It cannot be the other way around. And that's sort of, if we find more support for the one direction or for the other direction, we can be more confident in the claims that we make. So, if experiments are the gold, this is the silver, right? So this is the silver, and this is sort of as close as it gets. Running your own longitudinal study is very difficult, right? Sometimes it's just unfeasible. Some of these studies, they run for 20 years, for 50 years, and so on. But, there are these initiatives. And hopefully, actually, I just got the access, so most likely we will play around with this study. There's a big longitudinal study running in Ireland right now. It's called Growing Up in Ireland. It looks at the development of children. And now they already have 3 waves. 2 waves are available, so they collect information about children, then 10 years pass by, they go to exactly the same children again, and they look at how did they develop, what did they do, and then they follow them in another 10 years, and so on and so forth. Right? So that's sort of a longitudinal study. Okay. Lastly, let me mention the last 2 case studies and comparative studies. With a case study, the idea is to study one single case or setting, right, an intensive analysis to learn as much of it as possible, so really go into the depth, and normally you study your cases over a sustained period of time. So that means you spend a lot of time with a group of people, or you kind of, often it's associated with ethnographies or with participant observations and so on. However, it is impossible then to generalize from case studies. And some people are critical of case studies, and let's count me amongst them, because we don't really know how can we then say something about the general population from these things, right? So if you want to know more about case studies, you should probably talk with some of my colleagues, because I'm just not really the person to talk with here. Okay, then we have comparative studies. Comparative studies is basically, an extension of the case studies. There you then look at. Did I have the example about the kitties? No, I didn't. Okay, so here sort of apply the case study to several families. That's sort of what a comparative analysis is. You look just not at one particular case, one particular setting, but at a bunch of different ones, and then you try to compare them with each other. So apply to our family setting. The case study would mean you go out, you find one family, and you spend a lot of time with that family. You try to learn as much as possible about this family. You basically live with this family in their living room. You just sit there, you observe everything that happens over a long period of time, and then at the end, you write about it. A comparative design would be you have several families where you spend a lot of time with, and that's sort of how you learn stuff. But as I said, there are more courses about these kind of things, and I'm not really the person to talk about it. Okay, that's sort of the stuff for today. For next week, we talk more about literature and how to make sense of literature and what it's used for. Thanks.